The legislature is getting into session here very, very shortly, and we're going to talk with one of those legislators who's still got a lot of Oakland County Clerk in her, I think, and a lot of Secretary of State, and that's State Senator Ruth Johnson, who's got some ideas for what we ought to look at in terms of the upcoming May elections and all the absentee ballot voting that's being promoted. We'll get the ideas of Ruth Johnson and see what she's got in mind for what the legislature might do to step in to ensure the quality and the cleanliness, quite frankly, of our elections. So we'll chat with her about all of that. It's not easy to do for Jocelyn Benson, our new Secretary of State, obviously, but Ruth Johnson's been there, done that, and she's on the other end of our line. Senator, good morning.
Good morning, Frank. How are you?
I'm very well. I know you're about to go into session. There's the move to put together this bicameral committee, 5 senators and 5 House members what exactly would they do?
Well, the legislature's role is to write laws for the state, but right now we're primarily functioning just through executive decree. So we're creating this committee to ensure that the legislature has some oversight on the actions the governor's taking during the crises.
So this committee, which would be made up of Republicans and Democrats, was it 4 or 5 from each party?
I think that will be decided for sure today. We have caucus at 10 a.m. and we'll be discussing that.
All righty, and then the governor has already said that she's not in favor of this, and she has promised a veto. Will that have any effect on the deliberations?
I think we'll do the right thing no matter what. We need suspenders and a belt. We need to make sure there's oversight, transparency, and accountability on how we go forward. We can't let such a horrible thing as COVID turn things upside down to a point where people don't have that extra arm of the government that's watching over things. So I think we'll do what's right no matter what. I'm mostly concerned about people are not being able to vote in this next election because we have mail issues, and also putting these workers average age 70 at risk. Their average age is 72. 16 other states have combined them or changed them to a different date, and Michigan needs to do that.
The options, does that mean just multiple dates for the election so that people could vote at different weeks or different days during the week? How would that work?
No, what we have for May 5th, during what's considered to be one of our peak times, according to the governor's speeches, we have a school election for 200 jurisdictions out of the over 1,600 jurisdictions in the state, which means they have to run an election, and in her in her executive order, she says each jurisdiction has to have, in essence, a super precinct, at least one, because they're having trouble finding people to work. So we're going to have the Wisconsin style, and if you look into that, that caused a lot of problems and a lot of people getting COVID-19. Our workers are average age 72 are at particular risk. So I'm also concerned about the fact that the window design is not working for people to vote absentee, because unusually the Secretary of State sent out all the absentee ballot requests rather than those local clerks. And with that, it's a brand new system, it's big, it's difficult, and it's not working. The window envelope has no return address, so if the voter doesn't fold it exactly right, it ends up in Georgia in the at the return center. It's often known as the dead letter office. We have postage issues. The postage wasn't put on a number of them, and so the post office was not moving them. When they figured it out, they have to hand count every single one so that they can charge for it. And then the lateness of the mailing is a real big issue. Some of them just went out a few days ago, and it's a 3-day process through the mail. So we have mailing problems. We have health concerns. We know that Chicago and Wisconsin went ahead with their elections. It's caused death and it's caused COVID to continue to proliferate, when we could easily move August to August election. May can move to August.
And we'd have a lot better chance of being through the COVID epidemic. As you mentioned, all these school elections. May is the traditional time for that, for school districts to go to their residents and say, we need a little extra money for this or that, to hire more teachers, open another school here. This is where they convince the voters to pay for it.
Yes, and there are 200 jurisdictions with schools. Some of them are asking to have bonds renewed. Some are asking to build new things. There's a conglomerate. In the Oakland County, there were 4 of us that worked really hard, and I have to thank those superintendents because all of them deferred their school elections to August because we should have enough personal protection equipment. We should have protocols in place, and we shouldn't be at this height of COVID by then. So they were so thoughtful because they really wanted to go in May, but they did change them all to August. In Genesee County, that I also represent, we have, I think, 8 school districts, and John Gleason, he's the county clerk that I worked with here in Lansing at one time. We both called, and we were able to get 2 to put off their elections to August to make sure that the workers are safe and the protocols are in place.
Senator Johnson, is that a local decision to put off that election? Does each municipality or jurisdiction make their own decision on that, or is it up to the Secretary of State, Jocelyn Benson?
Well, this is kind of a hybrid, and certainly the locals did not have input on this. This was made by an executive order by the governor, and then each clerk had to beg their superintendent, please don't do this because my average age is 72, they have a high risk of dying, and we're supposed to be in close to peak. So those of us that were able to beg and be effective, we did okay. But unfortunately, some schools decided not to, and some do have bills coming up very quickly, but there's ways to get around that, too, to make sure they're held whole. So it was never a local decision. The clerks never got to vote on it, nor did the cities or townships that are responsible for conducting these elections. So when somebody says the local jurisdictions, what they're talking about is the schools decided, not the locals. It was taken away from the locals to be able to decide by the EO.
All right, one final question, if I might, before you have to head off to session in the state Senate, Ruth Johnson, and that question is simply this. We're hearing an awful lot about an all-mail-in presidential election this year, and even some Republicans are now coming out in favor of that. I'd like to get your take as a former Secretary of State and now a legislator about the efficacy of it and whether it's even possible.
Yeah, as chair of elections, I feel strongly, and after being a county clerk and Secretary of State, why would you take away an option from voters? It just doesn't make sense. There is a national effort to do this by a number of people. Our Secretary of State's involved in that, as well as one of our past governors, Jennifer Granholm, and they want all mail-in. But I think it's important that I have a right to go cast my vote and see that it was counted. And in a primary where people sometimes mix their votes, they won't even know that 30% of their votes have to be tossed out, 30% of their ballots, because they mixed them. So I say we vote both ways.
All right, thank you so much. We have a hybrid system, and that'll be just fine with Ruth Johnson, our former Secretary of State, and now the state senator of Michigan's 14th District from out in Holly. Thank you for being with us again. We'll talk again soon, I hope.
Thank you, Frank.
Be well. Ruth Johnson headed off to the session in Lansing, which will get underway in just a little bit.